People start homesteading all the time with grand visions. They want to live off-grid, grow all their own food, and do everything for themselves. They want to be as self-sufficient as possible with less dependence on the mainstream economy. Maybe they were raised in a city or a suburb and romanticized the rural life away from the hustle and bustle of the city. But after setting up their homestead and living for a while on their own in the middle of nowhere, they decide it's too hard and they pack it up and move back to regular society. There's a reason many homesteaders are ultimately failing in their self-sufficient life. Of course, homesteading is a hard life, but what's come to define homesteading life in popular culture and in the minds of most who take the plunge into it is rugged individualism. It's usually a small family or a couple with this dream of living off the land in isolation from the rest of society. I'd argue that most off-grid homesteaders are going about it all wrong if they're really trying to achieve self-sufficiency, and it's no surprise many of them don't last very long. They're doing it the hard way. And the way they live off-grid is making them more dependent on the economy and society they're supposedly trying to disconnect from. Except for the winter months for the past few years when I've gone to Florida, I've lived essentially off-grid for about 16 years.
For a large portion of that, I really lived off-grid, disconnected from the grid in pretty much every way that most people think of when they think off-grid. I built my own home, a natural straw bale tiny home. I tried to grow as much of my own food as possible using only hand tools. I set up my life with off-grid electricity, heating, and water systems. But I lived much differently from most off-grid homesteaders. I didn't live on a homestead. I lived in an intentional community.
When I watch homesteaders on YouTube, the ones that are struggling the most are the ones trying to make a go of it alone.
Maybe there's just a person or a couple living alone in the wilderness. Then there are the families that are also essentially going it alone, though they at least have each other to keep them company, and they may have kids old enough to help them with the chores.
But there's one big problem with the way most of these people go it alone. They replace the benefits of community and cooperation with stuff they just buy from the economy they're supposedly disconnecting from. Are you really self-sufficient if you're just buying a bunch of tools and equipment that were made by the economy you're supposedly disconnected from to grow your own food, make your own power, and build your own house? And if you have to make a lot more money from the mainstream economy to support your expensive homesteading lifestyle, are you really independent and self-sufficient? The homesteaders who struggle the most are the ones who are not only alone, but who can't afford to buy lots of tools and equipment to make their life off-grid much easier. When you're just a family, couple, or individual living alone in the wilderness, to make your homesteading possible over the long term, you're going to have to buy one of everything for yourselves.
That takes a lot of money and resources. Making money to buy a bunch of stuff makes your homesteading life even more of a struggle. The homesteaders who succeed are often independently wealthy and go the easy route by setting themselves up to live like the typical American. They just live in the country, have solar panels and wells, and cut down lots and lots of firewood. They also use lots of machinery that would make tasks that would be very difficult to do as one person much easier.
Someone I live with here at Dancing Rabbit calls homesteading a Ponzi scheme because the only way you can succeed at it is to get popular on social media trying to inspire others to try homesteading. What about all those people just watching off-grid videos who dream of living the way these influencers are? What happens when they get their piece of land and find they need all this expensive equipment to achieve the off-grid self-sufficiency they see in all these videos? So it seems that with the typical rugged individualist model of homesteading, you need to be independently wealthy and much more dependent on the mainstream economy to make it work for the long term. The word homestead itself conjures images of pioneers taking advantage of the Homestead Act to get their 160 acres stolen from Indian territory to live self-sufficiently on the edge of the frontier.
But typically humans didn't live this way throughout history. There are very rare examples in history of humans making it on their own in the wilderness. Even homesteaders in the American West didn't go it alone. This from the book Homesteading the Plains Toward a New History. Homesteading was not a solitary activity. Homesteaders formed both incidental and intentional communities and relied on those communities to succeed. The grid itself is a massive example of cooperation between humans. Indeed, most of the things off-gridders seem to talk about fleeing are examples of cooperation between humans. So off-grid living has become the embodiment of individualism, making a go of it on your own without the help of anyone else. And indeed, most off-gridders are fleeing other people, and in the process, they're making their attempt to live self-sufficiently infinitely harder.
After all, we're humans. Cooperating is our big thing. It's the thing that made us successful as a species. Sure, we have big brains and intelligence, but these adaptations made it possible for us to cooperate on a much more complex level than other species. At its heart, there's nothing wrong with cooperating with each other. And I'd argue it's the key to our survival. And it's sad that the idea of off-grid living seems to be one of rugged individualism, because that's definitely no way to live self-sufficiently. Where I live, I'm not going it alone, but I am living very self-sufficiently in many ways.
I live close to others in my eco-village. It's much easier to cooperate with people because they're close by. We share land together instead of each owning our own sprawling parcel miles away from others doing something similar. We all share a common vision, and we're close enough to each other to build that together.
Living in community means I don't have to own my own car.
Instead, I share a few cars and a heavy-duty truck with dozens of other people. I don't have to buy a tractor because I own one collectively with other people in the community. I don't have to build an entire hot water system with shower in my house because I share a hot water system and shower with dozens of other people. In my early days of living here, I even shared a kitchen with others until I built my own house with a kitchen.
I collectively own an entire common house and a couple other buildings with everyone else in my community.
The common house serves as an office space, a meeting and gathering space, a library, a kids' playroom, bathroom, and community kitchen. Having a community around to support you in a time of need is really important, and something that a lot of off-grid homesteaders can't rely on when they're so busy being rugged individualists. We have community work parties to clean up our collective space. We have community bent raisings or plastering parties when people are building their houses and need people power in place of machinery.
All these shared resources mean that living off-grid doesn't require extra expenses and expenditure of resources.
I have the benefit of many resources without having to build or buy one of each for myself, as most homesteaders do.
Recently, after years of mowing between the vines in my vineyard with a scythe, I decided to get an electric mower.
But instead of just buying a $500 mower myself, I sent out an email to the community and asked if there were others that wanted to share one. In less than a day, I had 3 others that wanted to share the mower. The perfect number for a little mower co-op. We each pitched in $130 and in a few days had a brand new electric mower. I saved $390, still got the use of an electric mower, and we each only used a fraction of the resources needed if each of us got our own mower. If I owned the mower myself, most of the time it would just be sitting in the shed gathering dust, so it was an easy thing to share.
Livestock is usually a large part of any homestead, but taking care of livestock is a full-time, year-round prospect. It binds you to your homestead every day of the year. The people here that raise livestock do it cooperatively, so it's actually possible to take a break from time to time and have someone else fill in for your feeding, irrigation, and pasture-moving duties. Almost 10 years ago, the community I live in created its own microgrid to produce its own renewable power. And to make that grid more reliable year-round, we connected to the wider grid in our area.
We did all this because our goal was to get our power in a more sustainable and practical way, and cooperating with others to provide for ourselves ended up being far more efficient in every way than each of us having our own separate off-grid power systems.
This off-grid YouTube couple spent over $50,000 on their self-installed 10 kilowatt homestead system and 60 kilowatt hours of lithium batteries. My personal system is a little over 1 kilowatt, and I've broken even or gone just over with my consumption. In other words, I'm producing most of my own power and not a net importer from the grid. The total capacity of our entire village microgrid and few off-grid systems for 50 people is only 40 kilowatts. When you live with cooperative systems and a connected microgrid, it's far more efficient per person in terms of cost and energy. To a lot of people, living off-grid seems to mean not only disconnected from the grid, the power grid, the water grid, but it means disconnected from the grid of society, disconnected from community. It means living alone in the wilderness as an individual or a family, but living completely alone, disconnected from community, is the least clever way to live more self-sufficiently. Of course, there are off-gridders out there who have a small community that they connect with in some way, and some might even cooperate in small ways with others. If they do, that's great. That'll make their lives easier. But this idea of going it alone in the wilderness really works against the idea of self-sufficiency. You're shooting yourself in the foot if you shun other people, and you likely won't last very long. It's a hard life alone in the country.
And the farther away your neighbors are, the harder it is to cooperate with them. So even if you have homesteading neighbors, If they aren't close to you, you're much less likely to find it practical to cooperate with them. It's much harder to share a tractor if you have to drive 5 miles down the road to use it.
Now, I'm not going to tell you it's some kind of utopia living in an intentional community. There are many drawbacks to, or maybe I'd say necessary evils to living in community.
It's not always easy, but what's hard is the part where you have to learn to live with and make decisions with other people. And as Americans who have been trained all our lives to worship rugged individualism, it can be hard to adjust. But pretty much for all of human history, cooperation in a community has been the norm. This is how we survived. It can be done, and it can enrich your life.
I've been living in community and cooperating with other people most of my adult life, and I've learned where my boundaries are. I don't cooperate as much as some do. I don't take advantage of the opportunities to share as much as some do. I've learned what I want to share with others and what I don't want to share with others. But I've also learned that cooperating with others instead of going it alone is the way to be more self-sufficient. If you want to spend a lot of money and stay strapped to the unsustainable economy, live alone in the wilderness and try to build your own house, grow your own food, and produce your own everything off-grid, you're going to need a lot of help, and you're going to have to buy a lot of equipment and tools to make it happen because you can't rely on your non-existent neighbors.
So don't be one of those homesteaders that gives up after a year or two when it gets too hard because you're trying to be a rugged individualist. Your community is a resource. Ensure your future by building and connecting with a wider community, or just come live here at Dancing Rabbit Ecovillage.